الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وآله وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي. اللهم ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا. اللهم ربنا انصر أخواننا المجاهدين في غزة وفي سائر بلدان المسلمين. اللهم انصر أوليائك في غزة وفي سائر بلدان المسلمين. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم. اللهم فرج عن إخواننا عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم. اللهم ثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. Okay. So we are here. On this understanding, society is not itself an association, for it is not an agent. It may be made up of or contain a multiplicity of associations and individual agents, but it's not an association or agent. Unless that is, it is constituted as one by an act or process of incorporation. So, for example, Californian society is not an association, but the state of California is, because it can act for while a society is not, a polity is an association, a political association. I'm not sure about this because a society can act as well based on its traditions and mores and culture and all those things. Society might have voluntary mechanisms of actions which differentiated from state, for example. But anyway, we won't push this point at this point. In pre-Civil War America, the southern states were a society since they amounted to a union of groups and communities living under common laws, some of which sharply distinguished it from the North, but they did not form a single political association until they constituted themselves as a confederacy. A society is a collectivity of people who belong to different communities or associations that are geographically contiguous, close to each other. The boundaries of a society are not easy to specify. A society is a collectivity of people who belong to different communities or associations that are geographically, I think it's contiguous. Yeah, not contagious is the same. That's the disease. The boundaries of a society are not easy to specify since the contiguity of societies make it hard to say why one society has been left and another entered. One way of drawing the distinction would be to say that since all societies are governed by law, a move from one legal jurisdiction to another is a more formal society. A move from one legal jurisdiction to another is a move from one society to another. But this has to be qualified because law is not always confined by geography, and people moving from one region to another may still be bound by laws from their places of origin or membership. Furthermore, some laws deal with relation between people from different jurisdictions. That being true, however, a society could be said to exist when there is some. I was trying to specify society still. That being true, however, a society could be said to exist when there is some established set of customs or conventions or legal arrangements specifying how laws apply to person whether they stay put or move from one jurisdiction to another. Thus, there was not much of a society among the different highland people of New Guinea when they lived in isolation from one another. Though there was a society in medieval Spain when Jews, Muslims under elaborate legal arrangements specifying rights and duties individuals had within their own communities and as outsider when in others. So society is an association which is not an agent, but it has some sort of legal infrastructure, and that legal infrastructure doesn't has to be it can be conventional, the legal structure, customs and mores. On the other hand, community would be something more specific or more intimate society, so to speak. A society is different, however, from a community. That's what it is. Which is in turn different from a society. A community is a collectivity of people who share some common interests and who are therefore united by bonds of commitment to that interest. Why it has to be interest? It can be many more non-commercial things, for example. But probably he is defining interest in broad enough terms. Those bonds may be relatively weak, but they are enough to distinguish communities from mere aggregates or classes of persons. However, communities are not agents. And thus are not associations. They are marked by shared understanding, but not by shared structure of authority. I mean, this is all by definition. So if they do have shared structures of authority of some type, we would say that they are state or they are associations. So there's no point in pushing him on that, I think. At the core of that shared understanding is an understanding of what issues or matters are of public concern or of public concern to the collectivity and what matters are private. Shared understanding, that's of community, I guess. The other theories of community have held that a community depends for its existence on common locality or ties of blood, ties of blood kinship. This account of community allows for the possibility of communities that cross geographical boundaries. Thus, while it makes perfect sense to talk of a village or a neighborhood as a community, it makes no less sense to talk about, say, the universal community or the scholar community or the religious community. One of the important features of a community is the fact that its members draw from its elements that make up their identities. So a community is more dealing with identity. I guess society will do that too, but probably you would say on a more less intimate level. The fact that individuals usually belong to as a member of community means that it is highly unlikely, if not impossible, that an identity would be constituted entirely by membership of one community. For this reason, almost all communities are partial communities rather than all encompassing or constitutive communities, because we might belong to different communities. I might belong to a community because of geographical location, the other because of linguistic commonality, or religious. They can crisscross. That's what he's saying. Fair enough. An important question then is whether there can be such a thing as political community. Yeah. An important question then is whether there can be such a thing as a political community. On this account of community, there can be a political community, which is defined as a collectivity of individuals who share an understanding of what is public and what is private within that polity. Whether or not a state is a political community will depend, however, on the nature of the state in question. The state. So there can be political community according to him, because one of the characteristics of a community is that you are able to differentiate between public and private realms, with reference to the with your shared understanding. So states that are societies are not political communities. States that are divided societies are not political communities. Why? Iraq after the Gulf War and Sri Lanka since the Civil War and arguably earlier are not political communities because there is serious disagreement over what comprises public. Okay. Arguably, Belgium is no longer political, though it remains a state. Now, there is one philosopher who has denied that a political society or a state, or at least a well-ordered democratic state, can be a community. I would think so. Because community is a communitarian concept, or at least according to John Rawls, such a society is neither an association nor a community. He mean political society. A community, he argues, is a society governed by a shared, comprehensive religious, philosophical, or moral doctrine. So that would be his later writings, political liberalism, because in Theory of Justice, arguably, he would have considered liberalism as a community, for example. So comprehensive views, I mean, this is a technical term, but comprehensive, shared comprehensive view. Comprehensive view is a view that will direct your whole life, whether it's individual, communal, or private, individual, communal, or social, or political. So, for example, Islam is a comprehensive worldview because it's similarly, liberalism is a comprehensive doctrine. So that's a comprehensive doctrine one. Yeah, political liberalism. Once we recognize the fact of pluralism, the fact of pluralism is that there are more than one comprehensive doctrines competing in a society. Rawls maintains we must abandon the hope of political community unless we are prepared to countenance the oppressive use of state power to secure it. Yeah, but oppression can take different forms, isn't it? So state and oppressions, especially in modern life, modern state oppression is always there. This is a new debate, so we'll stop here, and we'll just sort of try to list his concept of association, society, and community, especially because he tried to specify community a bit further in this segment we read today. Okay, let's go through this and then we'll stop. In the last session, we had looked at association, and one of the key things about association he had mentioned was that it has agency. And agency obviously comes through the structure of an association. So it has a hierarchy and chain of authority. So that's why, even though it is a collectivity, people are able to make decisions. So that's why he gave association and agency. But society for him, on the other hand, is not an association because it doesn't have agency. Society doesn't have agency. So he gives the example of California, which is a society, but doesn't have for the current society is not an association because it doesn't have agency. So that might be a characteristic of modern societies, which are individualistic, But he says that California is a polity. So as a polity, it is an association. And as a political association, that is a state, it has an agency. Um, so that's the basic distinction between society and association for him, that society doesn't have an agency. So that's why society cannot be political society cannot be called a state, but political association can be called an state, a state. But what are the characteristics of society for him? And one way to distinguish society from another is what he called laws and jurisdiction. But people can move from one jurisdiction to another. So a society which exists when there is some established set of customs. A society could be said to exist, set of customs, or conventions, or legal arrangement. So they specify how laws apply to person, whether they stay put or move from one jurisdiction to another. So society has to people belong in a set of customs, conventions, and some legal some laws. So he mentioned geography and the closeness of people living together, ruled by shared customs, conventions, but then he said that it not always necessarily geography is not always sufficient to establish or distinguish one society from another. For Highland people, for example, of New Guinea, they lived in Iceland, though there was there was not much of a society among different Highland people, even they lived close to each other in one single geographical proximity. But since they didn't have much interactions, according to him, they were not a society, though there was a society in medieval Spain when Jews, Muslims, and Christians coexisted under elaborate legal arrangements specifying rights and duties, had within their own communities as outsider when in others. So there's sort of a Spanish society, and then within it Muslim society, Christian society, and Jewish society. So I think for him, customs, convention, and legal jurisdictions are key to a society, although living together in closeness is also, and societies can overlap as well, according to him. But obviously these customs laws are of non-statal nature because societies are not states as far as he is concerned. Okay, the last thing, I think more substantial things he have said about communities. So we'll finish on that one. So community for him is based on one important thing for community is common interests, but I think more like shared understanding, from which the notion of common interests also thrive. So for him, society is too broad to have shared interests, but if you have shared laws and customs and jurisdiction, there should be some understanding of some shared understanding, obviously. But for him, community is more intimate. And at the core of this shared understanding, he said, is the distinction between what are the public concerns and what are private concerns. Although he mentioned that, so the distinction between public and private, what are public matters and private matters. comes from this shared understanding. Although he mentions two authors, one who says that blood kinship is key to community and common locality for another one. This can allow for the possible communities that cross geographical boundaries. That is one. That's it. While it makes perfect sense to talk of a village or neighborhood, it makes no sense to talk about, say, the university community or scholarly community or the religious community, according to those authors. But in his understanding, you can talk about. But generally, community is something more specific and more intimate. So, and then he went on to mention John Rawls, especially his later political writings, political liberalism related writings, because he claims that state is not a community. Although for our author, it seems like he's moving towards concept of political community, state as a political community. An association, I guess. So, but we'll retake his discussion of Rawls, which we had just started. We'll look at it in the next session. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب